I want to take a moment to talk about something that's been on my mind lately: BlackRock's growing influence over Bitcoin. It's no secret that BlackRock, one of the biggest asset managers in the world, has been buying up Bitcoin like there's no tomorrow. It's a bit shocking when you think about it. We're not talking about some small investment here. They've acquired almost 2% of the total Bitcoin supply. Let that sink in for a moment. 2% of an entire decentralized currency is now in the hands of a single corporate giant. Now you might be wondering, why does this even matter? Well, the whole point of Bitcoin, at least in the beginning, was to be decentralized, free from the grip of institutions like banks, governments, and major corporations. It was supposed to be a way for the average person to escape the traditional financial system, a system often controlled by those very same powerful players. But with BlackRock now owning such a large portion of Bitcoin, we're seeing the very thing we feared: the corporate takeover of a supposedly free and open financial system. BlackRock isn't the only one in this game either. Other big institutional investors, like Fidelity and JP Morgan, are also getting in on the action. These are the same players that already have their hands in global stock markets, commodities, and just about every other form of investment. And now they're coming for crypto. It's no longer just about Bitcoin being a digital currency for the people. It's becoming a playground for the financial elites. What's even more concerning is how quickly this is happening. BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF, which was approved at the beginning of 2024, has been raking in billions in trading volume. They've purchased hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins in just the first 9 months of the year. If they keep going at this rate, who knows how much they'll own in the future? 5%, 10%, maybe even more. The thought of a single company holding that much influence over a decentralized asset is unsettling. Here's where things get tricky. With BlackRock and other institutions controlling such a large chunk of Bitcoin, the very idea of decentralization starts to fall apart. Bitcoin is no longer this independent, free market currency. It's becoming institutionalized, tied to the same financial system that it was created to escape. This isn't just a hypothetical problem. It's happening right now, and it's happening fast. And you know what? A lot of people are cheering this on. They see the price of Bitcoin going up because of all this institutional investment, and they think it's a good thing. But at what cost? Sure, the price might rise in the short term, but in the long run, we're giving up control. We're handing over the keys to the kingdom to the very institutions we were trying to get away from in the first place. So what happens next? If BlackRock continues to buy up Bitcoin at this pace, it's only a matter of time before they become the main custodian of the currency. That means they'll have an enormous amount of control over its future. They could influence prices, shape the market, and even push for regulations that benefit them, all while the rest of us are left playing by their rules. In short, BlackRock's growing hold on Bitcoin is a big deal. It's not just about numbers or percentages. It's about the future of Bitcoin as a decentralized currency and whether it can survive the wave of institutional control that's crashing over it. We're at a turning point, and it's hard not to feel like we're losing what made Bitcoin special in the first place. As I dive deeper into the world of cryptocurrency, one thing has become increasingly clear. We're on the verge of a massive shift. The days of Bitcoin and other cryptos being this wild, decentralized space where anyone could jump in and ride the waves of volatility for profit are coming to an end. We're entering a new phase, one marked by institutional control and, without a doubt, heavy regulation. Here's the thing: crypto started out as a kind of rebellion. It was a way for people to break free from traditional financial systems, to make money outside the control of big banks, governments, and corporations. It was raw, volatile, and risky, sure, but that was also part of the appeal. You could invest, trade, or even just hold onto your crypto, and it felt like you were a part of something revolutionary, something different. But now, the game is changing. What we're seeing now is the beginning of what I can only describe as the institutionalization of crypto. Big players like BlackRock, Fidelity, and JP Morgan are not just dipping their toes in the water. They're diving in head first. These are institutions that already dominate the traditional financial world, and they're bringing that same level of control into the crypto market. They're buying up huge amounts of Bitcoin, creating their own funds, and pushing for regulatory frameworks that will make the market safer for them. For a lot of people, this might sound like good news. Regulation often means stability, and with the backing of powerful institutions, there's less risk involved in investing. But at what cost? The truth is, regulation often comes hand in hand with control. And once institutions like BlackRock have a firm grip on the market, it will no longer be the decentralized playground it once was. Think about it. As regulations come into play, we'll start to see fewer and fewer of the exchanges and platforms we're used to. The ones that can't or won't comply with these new rules will be forced to shut down or be absorbed by larger, more compliant institutions. And who's left standing? The big guys, those massive financial institutions that have already been running the traditional markets for decades. Once these regulations hit, it's going to be much harder for the average person to make the kind of gains they once could. The days of making a quick fortune by jumping into a new, high-risk token are fading fast. The volatility that made crypto so exciting, and yes, sometimes terrifying, is going to smooth out as the market becomes more regulated and controlled by these big institutions. They're not interested in wild fluctuations. They want stability and profit, but they want it on their terms. And let's not forget the impact this will have on decentralization. Crypto was born out of the idea that people should have more control over their own money without needing a bank or government to tell them what to do. But once these institutions sink their teeth into the market, that ideal fades. It's no longer about empowering individuals. It's about ensuring that the institutions have the upper hand. They'll shape the market, set the rules, and dictate how things operate. The really frustrating part is that we're seeing this happen in real time, and most people don't even realize it. They see the price of Bitcoin going up because of institutional buying, and they cheer it on. They think it's a sign of mainstream acceptance, a step toward crypto becoming a legitimate asset. But what they don't see is that this is the beginning of the end for crypto as we knew it. The freedom, the decentralization, the opportunities for the little guy, all of that is being chipped away, bit by bit. So, as we move forward, we're heading into a new world of crypto, one dominated by regulations, institutions, and a whole lot less freedom than we once had. It's the next cycle, and for those of us who've been here from the beginning, it feels a little bittersweet. We're watching the Wild West of crypto turn into a structured, institutionalized landscape, and there's no going back. As I dig deeper into the world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, one thing keeps standing out: the control that big institutions already have over the infrastructure behind it. I used to think Bitcoin was this untouchable, decentralized force, something outside the grip of banks, governments, and corporate giants. But the more I look into it, the more I realize how wrong I was. Let's start with the basics. Bitcoin doesn't exist in a vacuum. It needs infrastructure, things like energy, data centers, transaction networks, and internet service providers, ISPs, to function. Without these, Bitcoin would just be a bunch of code with no real-world application. And who controls this infrastructure? Surprise, surprise, it's the same big players who control everything else in the traditional financial world. Banks, governments, and massive corporations have their hands all over the energy and transaction networks that Bitcoin depends on. Take energy, for example. Bitcoin mining, the process that secures the network and verifies transactions, consumes an enormous amount of electricity. And where does that electricity come from? In many cases, from energy grids owned or regulated by big corporations and governments. If they wanted to, these institutions could make it incredibly difficult or expensive for Bitcoin miners to operate by increasing energy costs or restricting access to power. In fact, we've already seen governments in places like China crack down on Bitcoin mining by cutting off access to cheap electricity. Then there's the issue of transaction networks. When you send Bitcoin, that transaction needs to be processed, verified, and added to the blockchain. For this to happen, miners and nodes need to communicate with each other across the internet. And guess who controls the majority of the infrastructure that makes this communication possible? Internet service providers and telecom giants. These companies have the power to throttle, restrict, or even block the internet access needed to support Bitcoin transactions. It may sound extreme, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. If Bitcoin ever becomes a real threat to the traditional financial system, don't be surprised if these institutions start pulling strings to make things difficult for Bitcoin users. What's really troubling is that these institutions aren't just sitting on the sidelines. They're actively investing in and building the infrastructure that supports Bitcoin. Think about it. If you control the energy and the transaction networks, you basically control Bitcoin itself. You can decide who gets to mine, who gets to send transactions, and who gets to participate in the network. It's a subtle but powerful way of keeping control over something that was supposed to be free from their grasp. This ties into a much larger plan. It's not just about Bitcoin. It's about controlling global markets. The institutions that dominate the traditional financial system, big banks, governments, and massive corporations, are positioning themselves to have the same kind of control over the digital economy. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies were supposed to be a way to escape that control, to create a new financial system that wasn't ruled by the old power structures. But now, those very institutions are working to make sure that doesn't happen. They're building the infrastructure, setting the rules, and slowly but surely tightening their grip. And the scariest part is that most people don't even see it happening. They're too focused on Bitcoin's price going up or down to notice that the foundation is being laid for a future where big institutions have just as much control over crypto as they do over traditional finance. I can't help but feel a sense of irony here. Bitcoin was supposed to be a revolution, a way to take power away from the institutions that have dominated the financial world for so long. But now, those same institutions are becoming the gatekeepers of the very infrastructure that Bitcoin relies on. They're getting their claws in deeper and deeper, and if we're not careful, we'll wake up one day to find that the decentralized dream of Bitcoin has been replaced by the same centralized control we were trying to escape. It's a sobering thought, and it makes me question just how decentralized Bitcoin really is. When the banks and governments control the infrastructure, how free are we really? As I started digging into how cryptocurrencies are being used around the world, one of the most surprising things I came across was the way the US government is leveraging them, especially in places like Venezuela and Ukraine. I always thought of crypto as this decentralized, independent force, but it turns out even governments are figuring out how to use it to their advantage. And honestly, it's a little unnerving when you realize what's really going on. Let's take Venezuela, for example. A few years ago, the US was openly opposed to the Venezuelan government under Nicolas Maduro. The US didn't like the regime, wanted regime change, and needed a way to support opposition groups. Now, in a traditional setting, you'd have to use banking systems to funnel money into a country, systems that the US could no longer access because of sanctions or opposition from the Venezuelan government. But with crypto, they found a way around all of that. The US turned to Circle USDC, a stable coin that's pegged to the dollar, to send money directly into Venezuela, bypassing the traditional banking system entirely. It's a brilliant strategy when you think about it. Instead of relying on banks, which can be blocked or tracked by the Venezuelan government, they used a digital currency that allowed them to fund opposition groups right under the regime's nose. It's almost like laundering money, but through crypto. By using USDC, the US could discreetly get financial support to groups in Venezuela without having to worry about the government cutting off access to funds. And it doesn't stop there. The same thing is happening in Ukraine. When the war with Russia escalated, the US found a way to support the Ukrainian government, not just with weapons and aid, but also with digital payments. The US government helped push the adoption of a new digital ID system in Ukraine called DIA. This system is tied to all sorts of digital payments, making it easier for the US to monitor where their money is going and ensure it's not falling into corrupt hands. In a country like Ukraine, where corruption has been a problem for years, this system allows the US to track every dollar they send. It's sold as an anti-corruption measure, but at the same time, it gives the US an incredible amount of control over Ukraine's internal finances. What's happening here is that the US is using cryptocurrencies and digital payments not just to evade traditional banking restrictions, but also to gain control. By bypassing traditional financial systems, they can move money where they want, when they want, without the oversight that comes with international banking laws. It's a way to operate in the shadows, under the radar, while still exerting influence in foreign countries. This use of crypto by the US government is a prime example of how state control can be extended through digital currencies. On the surface, crypto seems like a tool for freedom and decentralization, but when governments get involved, it becomes a tool for power and control. They can use it to manipulate financial systems in other countries, fund groups that support their interests, and keep tabs on how every dollar is being spent. It's a strange mix of freedom and control. On the one hand, cryptocurrencies give people a way to escape the limitations of traditional banks. But on the other hand, when governments like the US get involved, it becomes clear that even digital currencies can be used as tools of influence. It makes me wonder if crypto will ever truly be free from government control, or if it's just another piece of the puzzle in their broader plan to control global markets. In both Venezuela and Ukraine, we see how the US has cleverly adapted to the rise of digital currencies, using them as a workaround when traditional methods would be too difficult or too visible. It's a reminder that no matter how decentralized and independent a system might seem, there's always a way for those in power to turn it to their advantage. And as digital currencies like USDC become more widespread, we might see this kind of strategy used in even more countries around the world. The question is, how far will they go? When I first got into Bitcoin, like many others, I saw it as a beacon of hope, something revolutionary that could give power back to the people. It was created with the promise of decentralization, a way to escape the control of banks and governments. No more middlemen, no more dependence on financial institutions that have long dominated our lives. For a lot of us, Bitcoin represented financial freedom, the ability to hold and move our money without anyone telling us how or when to do it. But the deeper I dig, the more I question whether that original dream was ever really possible, or if it was even the true intent behind Bitcoin in the first place. Lately, I've started to wonder, what if Bitcoin was never really about decentralization? What if it was always a tool for control, a way for governments or big institutions to slowly but surely take over? It sounds like a conspiracy, right? But let me explain. Bitcoin's origins have always been shrouded in mystery. No one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto, its supposed creator, really is. There are theories, of course. Some say it was a group of cryptographers, others think it was an individual genius working alone. But there's also the speculation that Satoshi was working with, or even for, a government agency. The idea that Bitcoin might have been developed with government involvement has been floating around for a while now, and honestly, when I look at how things have unfolded, it doesn't seem all that far-fetched. Think about it. Bitcoin was created at a time when trust in the financial system was at an all-time low, right after the 2008 financial crisis. People were desperate for an alternative, something that wasn't controlled by the same banks and institutions that had just wrecked the global economy. And here comes Bitcoin, offering just that, a decentralized peer-to-peer currency that could operate outside the traditional system. It was perfect timing, almost too perfect. Fast forward to now and look at what's happening. The very institutions that Bitcoin was supposed to challenge, big banks, corporations, and even governments, are the ones controlling it. They're buying up massive amounts of Bitcoin, creating their own funds, and setting up the infrastructure that makes Bitcoin work. The promise of decentralization is fading fast, replaced by the same centralization of power we were trying to escape. It's almost like we've been led into a trap. Bitcoin got us all excited about the idea of a decentralized currency, but now that we're all in, the same institutions that we were running from are closing in. They control the exchanges, the mining operations, the infrastructure, and soon enough, they'll control the regulations too. What if that was the plan all along? What if Bitcoin was never meant to free us, but to lure us into a system that would eventually be dominated by the same players we were trying to avoid? One of the most unsettling parts of this whole thing is how much control these institutions are starting to exert. Bitcoin was supposed to be transparent, open, and free. But when big corporations like BlackRock start buying up huge chunks of it, and governments start pushing for regulations that will benefit them, it feels like the rug is being pulled out from under us. The decentralized dream is turning into a centralized nightmare. And here's the kicker. What if that was always the plan? What if Bitcoin was designed from the very beginning to be co-opted? Governments and financial institutions are experts at controlling markets, at turning something that was supposed to be revolutionary into just another cog in the system. We've seen it happen before, and we could be watching it happen again, right in front of our eyes. The mystery surrounding Satoshi Nakamoto only adds to this suspicion. If Bitcoin was truly created to be a tool for freedom, why has its creator disappeared without a trace? And why is there so much secrecy around Bitcoin's origins? Could it be that governments were involved from the start, quietly guiding its development so that they could take control when the time was right? It's a tough pill to swallow, but the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. We've been told that Bitcoin is a way to escape the traditional financial system, but now it looks like we're just walking right back into it. Only this time, the control is hidden behind the guise of decentralization. The big institutions are taking over, and we're left wondering if Bitcoin was ever really about freedom at all, or if it was just another tool for control, cleverly disguised as a revolution. It's a sobering realization, and it makes me question everything I thought I knew about Bitcoin. Was it really meant to be the people's currency, or has it always been part of a larger plan to keep us under the thumb of the very powers we were trying to escape?